Welcome back, Faithful. We are here with the second live look-in English of training camp, and today I am joined by ESPN's Nick Wagoner. Nick, thank you so much for being with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so we're going to start today off with a little recap of the first couple weeks of training camp. We were just talking, lots of highs and a few lows for quarterback Trey Lance. How would you assess his performance, especially in that second week of practice when the offense really started to hit its stride?
Yeah, I think Kyle Shanahan just kind of laid out there how I feel, and this is the Trey Lance experience right now, and this is probably what it's going to be in the early parts of the season too, where you're going to get the highs and you're going to get the lows. So even Saturday, I thought Saturday's practice was a really good example of that. He had an interception, had a couple of moments that weren't so good, and then he bounced back and led a nice drive and a 2-minute drill towards the end, moved the ball. So those are kind of going to be the things when you have a quarterback who hasn't played, and that, quite frankly, it's not just in the NFL. Trey Lance hasn't played a lot of football, period, certainly at the college level and beyond. So I think right now what you're seeing with Trey Lance is going to be a lot of what you see, particularly early in the season. The hope is that he continues to grow, and obviously you have to keep in mind that they're playing a really good defense right now, and that group is going to make things hard, and they're not game planning. So, it's not like Kyle Shanahan's out there setting things up with play action and some of the stuff that you would see in the regular season. So that's all part and parcel of this. Some of the accuracy things I think they'd like to see improve, but again, that's going to be a progression for Trey Lance as he goes on and gets more snaps.
And we were just talking about it as well. Kyle Shanahan keeps it real with his players, keeps it real with the media. He kind of has a little bit of a tough love mentality, calls it like he says, and he did mention, that Trey did have some mistakes that, although they are developmental, he's being a little less forgiving as the team progresses through training camp.
Yeah, I think that's going to be kind of how Kyle always operates, and players appreciate that. Like, players don't want to be lied to, and they certainly don't want a coach who's going to tell them one thing behind the scenes and then tell the media something different about them. And so he's always going to shoot them straight, and it's also just the way to get better. Brandon Aiyuk is a great example. Last year at this time, Brandon Aiyuk had started camp really well. He tapered off a little bit, had an injury, and then at the beginning of the season was persona non grata for a while. He came back at the end of the year once things started to click, and now you see the results of that. So I think that's going to be always the way Kyle Shanahan treats his players, because he knows that if they have the talent in them, and he obviously recognizes that in Trey Lance, that's going to be the way he gets it out of them, by putting in that work.
Kyle did say as he was addressing the media earlier this morning, that he does expect Trey to have a great practice today. Sunday, a little bit of an off day for him, but one you did mention, Brandon Aiyuk continues to have an amazing camp. He is Trey Lance's go-to target. Just what is the contrast from last year to this year? I know you touched upon it.
Yeah, the big thing with Brandon Aiyuk, and Kyle Shanahan has talked about this, Brandon has talked about this, is he came into the NFL at a weird time for the whole world. All of us standing here, everyone here, a weird time, and during a pandemic where you don't get a regular off season. You don't get to go through an off-season program and get those reps under your belt, and that's a huge part of this, especially as a rookie. And playing receiver for Kyle Shanahan, one of the most demanding things you can do, because he was a receiver. So he holds them to a little bit. Absolutely. He holds them to a little bit higher standard. And so he finally, this offseason, for the first time, because the pandemic is because
the world
mostly,
allowed it.
The world has allowed it.
The world has allowed
that he was able to have a full off-season program. He trained with Trey Lance in Southern California, which is a smart political move, but also a good move for him in terms of being able to get on the same page and get the timing down and all of those things. And you're really seeing him take that step forward, where this year it feels more real than it did last year, where it was a little bit more up and down. And so, I think Brandon Aiyuk, Jimmy Ward said it best. He's probably been the best player in camp aside from possibly Nick Bosa, and there's a chance that he's going to take a big leap forward, and that's another positive for Trey Lance. If we're talking about Trey Lance having yet another weapon that he can rely on regularly.
And while we're talking about weapons on the offense, I think we got to mention Deebo Samuel signed that 3-year contract extension last Monday, has spent the entire week with the team in a reduced snap count, but still participating in all of the scrimmage portions. Definitely working on building that chemistry with Trey Lance. We saw, I think, Friday, him and Trey taking time after practice just to get that timing just right. How beneficial is it for this team to have number 19 back in the fold?
Well, it's everything, and it starts, and I don't get big into the intangibles because you can't measure them, but just from an energy standpoint, I think Deebo Samuel, like Trent Williams having his dance partner is a big deal. Like, just that part of it alone helps. But yeah, the thing is you're not complete without Deebo Samuel, and you're really not complete because of all the different things that he can do for you. And so if you can start start plugging some of the things in that he's going to do, whether it's, jet sweeps or those little pop passes that Kyle Shanahan likes to run, those types of things, but also giving Trey Lance an opportunity to get those reps with him because they just didn't have that time. Deebo Samuel wasn't here for most of the offseason program, was here for the mandatory minicamp, but didn't participate. So you saw them the other day spend a little extra time afterwards, getting some additional reps in, trying to get their timing down. So all of that matters, and it's hard to measure as we sit here like day by day, but when you look back, that's when it's like that was an important moment. It was important for Deebo Samuel to be here, even when he wasn't practicing, and so that they certainly, get on the same page.
Yeah, and Trey mentioned it as well. Every rep that he takes, the offense just seems to be getting a little bit slower for him, better understanding of what he can do with all the weapons that are around him. Next, we got to talk a little bit about the new updates we got about what to look for in the preseason. Head coach Kyle Shanahan addressed the media this morning. Sounds like the plan is to have Trey Lance, some members of the offensive line, possibly other starters, have some time, some reps in game 1 and game 3, less of an emphasis in that second preseason game.
Yeah, Kyle Shanahan has kind of always consistently been this way. He doesn't like the preseason at all, which I'm on board with. He would prefer there to be no preseason games, as he said today.
For people to get hurt, yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
But it is important for some of those bottom of the roster spots. But this has always kind of been the way he does it. He has an interesting dilemma this year because he has a quarterback who, again, hasn't played a lot of snaps in the NFL. But at the same time, you don't want to throw him out there behind an offensive line, an offensive line particularly that's not going to have a lot of starters. Trent Williams probably won't play a lot if he does play at all in the preseason. Mike McGlinchey coming back from injury may be the same situation for him. So I imagine maybe a series on Friday against the Packers, and you'll see him a little bit more in that third preseason game, which has always been kind of, they call it the dress rehearsal or whatever. So we'll have to wait and see how that goes. But they got a long wait, Lindsey. After game 3, they got a long wait. I think it's 17 days before they play a game. So I'm sure he's going to want to get a little bit of a look at him, but also be very, very cautious because the last thing you want is an injury.
I think what's interesting is, like you said, there's 17 days between that last preseason game and the start of the season, but I believe Kyle said it was 3 games in like 12 days, so a jam-packed schedule. Of course, the Niners are going to start off with the Packers here at Levi's Stadium on Friday, then head to Minnesota, and then shortly after Houston. Kyle Shanahan saying that he's most excited this preseason about those joint practices. This will be my first time observing them, but typically, what is the most productive stuff that comes out of those?
Well, the great thing and all these guys will tell you this as we get into the dog days of camp here, is just getting a chance to hit somebody else and see somebody else. And so Fred Warner wants to be annoying. He can do it a little bit more freely, knowing that maybe there will be a little more pushback in those scenarios, but it's just good work because you get to go ones against ones. And really, I think you've seen so many more teams do this now that it has become almost a replacement for that fourth preseason game, certainly, but really just kind of the preseason as a whole, because you see the Rams, for example, where Sean McVay he doesn't play any of his starters hardly at all in any of training camp or in any preseason games. And so I think you're seeing more of a move toward that, but it is an opportunity to, we're seeing a different defense. Maybe we can plan a little bit and we can put in some things that we might want to do, but you obviously don't want to show too much. And of course, you only do it against teams that aren't on the schedule, which in this case, Minnesota, a team with a lot of familiarity. Their GM used to be here in San Francisco, so there's a lot of ties there. The Kirk Cousins thing, of course, I'm sure will come up a time or two. So all of those different things that'll play out next week in Minnesota.
And just for all the fans that maybe don't get to travel, for you, what is the best part of doing these road preseason games?
Well, I like the joint practices. I mean, that's the preseason games. I can't lie. I cannot sit here and I can't sit here and pretend that I'm into them. So I root for very quick, injury-free, weather-free preseason games.
I think that is what we all want, right? I did want to touch on, we don't have a ton of time today for this live look-in, but preliminary depth chart. Again, this is not a depth chart that is put together specifically by Kyle Shanahan, but some things to glean from it. Just one rookie in a starting position, that's Spencer Burford. Any surprises that you saw on there?
Yeah, not really. I mean, I think that the depth chart, so kudos to the PR staff, because the depth chart matches what we've seen on the field, which you've seen, Jake Brendel and Daniel Brunskill have been rotating at center, but Brendel seems like he might have a little bit of an early edge there. Spencer Burford has been getting those reps at right guard, all of the reps at right guard. I still think that there's maybe a little more competition there, even if it's not happening, just because, as Kyle Shanahan mentioned today, Daniel Brunskill played right guard all through last season. So they know what they have in him. They'd like to see him if he can push for that center job and maybe strengthen two positions that way. But not a lot of surprises otherwise. And, I look at the nickel spot, Darquez Dennard, who came in last year and was so good.
Learned the playbook,
Learned the playbook overnight and played 18 important snaps against the Rams in a Week 18 game they had to have. He seems like he's kind of firmly taking control of that nickel job, which may be a little bit surprising if we're talking about what my expectations were coming into camp versus where we are now. But based on what we've seen on the field and what that looks like, I think it's been about even, about right.
Yeah, I think one thing that was cool to see was Ray McLeod. He's a guy that I feel like has had specifically a really good past weekend. We talked about Trey Lance leading a really impressive 2-minute drill to close out practice. I believe it was Friday or Saturday. The days are blending.
Saturday, I believe.
Saturday, yeah.
It's all the same. It's Groundhog Day.
I know, exactly. Had a great touchdown pass there, just making catch after catch, and it looks like he's kind of in that number 4 wide receiver spot. Also, Kyle Shanahan, super excited about him being able to be a punt and kick returner for the team. A position that probably doesn't get enough love, I would say.
Well, the special teams as a whole last year didn't get enough love, and they put a lot of love into it. And by love, I mean money in the offseason.
Money, talent,
it was obviously a priority for them in the offseason to improve that special teams unit. Finding a returner, obviously you mentioned McLeod has been that, is going to be that, but they spent some decent money on George Odom and Oren Burks, guys who will be core special teamers this year. Again, not the greatest thing to talk about, doesn't necessarily excite people, but it is the kind of thing that can make a difference. And for all the proof you need of that, go back to that Green Bay game. Yeah, exactly. And it's funny because the Niners hadn't been great in that area for most of the season, but the Packers were substantially worse, and the Niners took advantage of it. So it can be meaningful at the right times.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Nick. That's it for this Live Look-In, and we'll see you Friday at the preseason game.